It has indeed been a dizzying and richly layered 2 days of conversations. And a bit of a tradition with the Journalist Forum has been to do this concluding roundtable of that we've sometimes called practicing the craft. And this is to hear from you and to get a conversation going about the challenges of the beat, different ways of doing the beat, and taking in this information and putting it out there as compelling content. And for this, I would like to invite up Paige Carlson-Heim and Shelley Silva, who we're all going to co-facilitate this conversation. And I must say, the Journalist Forum this year was made possible by TD Bank. So I just want to thank you for this engagement. I met Paige at a meeting in Washington and was interested in it's actually the TD Charitable Foundation, and then we went from there. But I think it's going to be valuable to hear from the private sector, from a bank, and in terms of some of Shelley's observations that we've been talking about. She actually her bio is in the resource gallery. She was head of the Housing Authority in Philadelphia, so she has a lot of experience and perspective. And so to kick things off, not that, the conversation I think is going to be really good, but to kick things off, I would invite Shelley to make some of those observations about what we've heard these past 2 days.
So first, I just want to thank with some gratitude. It's just been an amazing 2 days. Whenever we at the bank get to sit and listen, like Erica said, she stole my line, we feel gratitude for getting closer to the issues. We don't sit at the bank and think we have the answers to any of these problems alone. And so, as Anthony mentioned in January, when we came in and came to your session in DC, Paige and I left with, I think, 2 notebooks full of things that we wanted to talk about with the TD Bank team. And I'm glad that the team is in the back of the room so we don't have to give them our scribble scrabble next time. They've been in the room listening as well. But we know as a financial institution, we don't have the answers to solve these problems, but we do have some of the resources to bring smart, innovative folks into the room to have these important discussions. So again, thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful. A few of my observations. So Max said in the beginning that I would be confused and perplexed by the end of these 2 days, and I have been, but I've been really energized. And someone said yesterday, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time to make progress on this affordable housing issue. And we completely agree, right? When we're at the bank, we're not just thinking about financial education and training people on how to manage their money, but we have a responsibility for creating products that make people closer to making home affordability and their dreams come true. So that's one thing. The other thing is the hyper locality of the housing issue, right? I'm a Philadelphian through and through. I worked at the Philadelphia Housing Authority for over a decade. What I saw and live every day in Philadelphia is my reality. But at TD Bank, that's something that we try to do a little differently than our other big bank partners. Our foundation is set up in a regional way. We understand that to deal with the issues of our customers, colleagues, and communities, we got to get close to it. We hire people that live in the community, we partner with the community, and we listen to the community. So that's another thing that was really important to me. And then the collaboration piece, right? As we try to tackle an issue of this size and scope, government, private sector, the investor community, we have to all work together to really collaborate and bring the best practices to life. And so those are some of the things that we're going to take away. I also just wanted to say that I'm really grateful to the journalists that are in the room today that took their time to be here. You are on the front line of storytelling. I joked with Anthony that when I was at the Housing Authority, I would run from reporters. And it was because it was a different model then. Like that was 20 years ago. I know I look really young, but that was 20 years ago, right? And every question was, why do you have 100,000 people on your housing wait list? Why does it take 5 days to fix one work order? What happened with that fire, right? But as we've matured, we understand that having conversations in spaces like this about these issues, these are all challenges we want to face head on. And as a young housing authority person, I remember every day just walking in trying to do right by the 75,000 tenants that I had responsibility for. And it was a wonderful experience. So great being with everyone. I can't wait to hear all of the learnings.
So you were saying that you didn't want to tell when you got a question how many people on your waiting list. You want to you're with your team. You're like, don't tell them anything, right? And that has changed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not at the Philadelphia Housing Authority anymore, but the executive director there now has a large Twitter following, or X following, and he is, he's out there telling the stories and partnering with the government officials and local officials and the community on trying to address these issues. It was a different model back then, right? And so it's just wonderful the progress that's been made.
Well, in terms of that interaction, that's
In
what
Philadelphia.
Okay, we got Philadelphia folks. In terms of that interaction, that's something I hope that will be surfaced about, what you all think of when you're working on stories. Do you think that everybody's got an angle, and so you're a little bit standing back in that way, or are you looking to the nonprofit sector and academia and just looking for information, and I'm sure it's a mix, but I'm hopeful to hear a little bit more about the nature of that interaction these days. Paige, you want to say a few words about and then facilitate the conversation?
Sure, thank you. I want to echo Shelley's remarks in the spirit of being very grateful to both be in the room and to for all of you who took the time to come here. Before, I've been at TD for nearly 14 years now, either in the community development or in the philanthropic space. But before that, I worked for a statewide housing policy organization that represented nonprofit practitioners in the affordable housing space. So in some respects, this issue is very close to my heart. And I have the privilege to work now at a financial institution that cares just as much about it as I do. We understand our responsibilities, and we want to be part of solutions, which is why coming to forums like this is such a privilege. So a couple of the things that struck me at the beginning of the day yesterday, Max said, we set this up because we want cognitive dissonance in the room. I think we got some of that. And while it may have been a bit uncomfortable at times, I loved it. I loved it because there are meaningful discussions happening, and that's what we need. I think, to Shelley's point about running from the media, I used to do that too. But at the end of the day, this is, somebody else said, I think it was Chris that said, your jobs as journalists are hard. And I get that. It is hard, right? And so what I'm curious to hear in this session is, what is it that you want to leave here and go write about? What most excited you about what you heard here? What questions do you have? My favorite question from you was asked yesterday by Robbie, who at the end of a panel said, this zoning thing is really, really complicated, and I have to go back and write about it. Help me to understand how to write about it in a way that connects with people. And I love that question, and I'm not going to forget it, right? Because at the end of the day, when you've been doing this work, as you know, for a long time, people don't want to hear about it. Or somebody else said in another panel today, there's stigma, right? So how do we get to what it is about this issue that connects all of us, right? Are there value propositions that can be the basis of how we tell these stories? Housing is a human right. How can anyone argue with the fact that we should all have a place to call home and feel safe in it? That's kind of where I'm coming from.
That is a wonderful way to put it. We have a system and a framework, though, that that would beg to differ, right? That everyone here is kind of in that framework, and obliged to cover the conflicts, YIMBY, NIMBY. What we saw about institutional investors, certainly. But is there any chance of different kinds of narratives emerging, aside for just take the YIMBY NIMBY narrative, which is true, it's happening, and it's fascinating and interesting, and the names that we call each other are compelling copy. But does anybody see sort of new narratives emerging on the topic of housing, and if so, how, or different? Yes, please, let's get it started.
I mean, I think that
if everybody, I'm so sorry, if everybody could just still identify yourself, and then we'll pass around that mic. We had a temporary supply chain mic issue.
Robbie Square from State Line. For me, I think I try to, I cover housing and social services. So the through line through that is homelessness. And I think that there are people who may think that they are so far removed from homelessness, but don't realize that, the proximity to homelessness really only takes a medical emergency. It takes, a missed rent payment. It takes a lot of things. I have someone who grew up homeless, so, I understand that, fundamentally. And I think, when people feel so far removed from something, they don't recognize it, and they often dehumanize it. And so I think sometimes trying to at least put a narrative that this person really they may have different circumstances, they don't have a home like you do, but they're still a human being, and their circumstances are different than yours, but still trying to maybe understand the circumstances and not this, not this lawmaker who's pushing this thing through your community or pushing this thing that you don't like. Look at the people who are involved. I think about people who come out of jail and are looking for housing. How are those people going to be situated if they don't have a home to go to? And how are we going to judge them for not being given the access and the resources to be able to resituate their lives and get a chance to it? So I always think about trying to find nuance in all these things and trying to find a way to explain to readers and anyone I talk to that life's about circumstances, and sometimes it's about the hand that you were dealt, and some of our hands are really shitty. But let's try to maybe understand a little bit through storytelling, through factual information, but also through different perspectives. So, trying to maybe reduce from the stereotypes of everything, the stereotypes of the NIMBY and the YIMBY, the stereotypes of the homeless person, the stereotypes of a low-income community, and try to figure out all these human conditions, because really, more or less, the system's really fucked up. And we need to try to figure out why the system's so messed up and why it pits all of these forces against each other instead of trying to figure out why we're not maybe pushing for something more holistic and systemic. So.
It sounds like a bit of a closing of the distance of the people that you're all writing, the people that you're all writing about. How about anybody else? What are how do you feel as you cover housing? Day after day. Sometimes it's a political story. Oftentimes it's an economic story, a business story. What have been some of your experiences as you sort of try to keep in mind all these layers of complexity? Yes. And remember, just identify yourself. Yes.
I'm Emily Hoven with the San Francisco Chronicle. Kind of going off what Robbie said, and this is something that I've written about, is that I think sometimes journalists and the people that we cover and the politicians and policymakers and state officials or whoever local officials that we cover are in a very vicious cycle where, and this is partially because of the internet and just being in like a clickbait society and a headline driven society where we do reduce people to taglines for headlines and clicks, and we create a system where, you know, maybe people who are working at the housing authority or whatever feel that we're gonna, you know, attack them or have like a gotcha moment, or no matter what progress they have made, still portray it in a negative light. And part of the reason is like it is our job to kind of find the bad things and the problems and write about them. But then, you know, talking to a lot of folks who work in the government, there's a sense of frustration on their end because, you know, they are doing things that are helpful, and then we're frustrated because they're running away or they're not giving us information or they're not responding quickly, and like then we feel like we're in the dark, and then it just creates this cycle, and then the, you know, readers don't trust the media because we have these like clickbaity headlines and things can be reduced or just presented in reductive ways. And this is not just for housing, I just think it's a general problem, but some of the comments that Ravi made made me think about that, because I think one of the most challenging things to be right now is a journalist and be able to portray things in a complex and humane and accurate way. And sometimes like the whole truth can genuinely like never come out. I just did a story about a man who was released from a state hospital and ended up in an SRO in San Francisco. And I was trying to understand how did that happen, but you know, there's so many privacy laws that prohibit that. And so all you can tell is a partial story, but you have to do it in a way that, you know, is as accurate as possible and as fair as possible. And something that I found is that there were problems all along the way in the state system where it was the state prison department, state hospital department, housing, like probation, all of this. But the problem was that all of them were doing the best they could within the framework that they had. And so sometimes it's like it's a system beyond even the people who are running the system, if that makes sense. And so I just think that assigning blame in these situations is very, very, very thorny. And I don't really have more of a point than that. I just think that that's something that I encounter a lot in my work, and I think that it's very visible in issues of housing. Just because there are so many different agencies and services that intersect with it, and then trying to trace a person's path or define a success story or define a failure is very, very complicated.
Well, there's no doubt as we move the microphone over to JK that you're all covering a really big story from a lot of our perspectives. It is the big story adjacent to the climate emergency. And one thing I wondered that maybe it'll come out through these conversations is should it be called the affordability crisis? And what's the utility of that ultimately? But JK, please.
No.
Oh.
Oh, hi, I'm Talisha Bryan from Crane's New York Business. So that's part of what I was going to bring up, is that affordability has kind of become this nebulous term that can mean, you know, housing homeless people to housing people who earn $100,000 a year. So for our audience, obviously we know housing is a human right, but in New York it's also a status symbol. So there are people who, I have reporters, it's usually younger reporters who I'll assign a story and they'll about, okay, who's gonna be eligible for this housing lottery for this apartment building, and they'll go out and find someone who's on the margins of society, but you almost want the audience to connect to it by showing them someone who has a steady job and makes a good living and is still eligible for the housing lottery. And also, I just really find area median income frustrating because it's not something that the average person understands, and it can change from Bensonhurst to the North Shore of Staten Island to Fordham Road in the Bronx, to be very local. Yeah, I'm a native New Yorker, I'm sorry, those are my examples. But it just, there doesn't seem to be a way to make people understand who earn a decent living, that we're talking about you when we're talking about affordable housing. And I think it becomes this conversation where it's like, oh, these poor people who need housing. It's like, no, you need housing. We need you to care about this because it affects you. So there almost needs to be a way where we segment it so that more people understand that this is something that is going to affect them and that they should be really invested in who lives where. But in New York, there definitely is this idea that I know that people may have heard about that apartment building with mixed incomes where the luxury owners were, yeah, they entered through one door and then the people who were in the housing lottery couldn't use that same door. So there's just, it's just too big of a phrase. That's where I find the frustration in covering affordable housing.
Hi, I'm J.K. Deneen from the San Francisco Chronicle. So one of the things that's happening with the state government preempting local zoning is that there's fewer chances for reporters to actually know what's going on. It used to be that, like, for example, there was this 70-story, an application for a 70-story apartment tower that was filed last week in San Francisco, and that they will not have to go to the Planning Commission. It cannot be appealed to the Board of Supervisors. There's actually not a venue for the public to weigh in on it. So that's maybe great, but it's also, well, you know, how do we talk about these things if everything's just gonna go straight through? I mean, there used to be a place on the planning department website in San Francisco where every project had to file like a PPA, like a pre-planning application, just saying what it is. And as a journalist, I looked at it every day to see what projects were coming in. They shut that down because there's no more PPAs. You know, things are going to be approved as of right. And so I don't like, you know, covering 8-hour planning commission meetings that much, but at the same time, it was super valuable to know what the community is saying and, you know, how they're thinking about these things. And so I'm just concerned that, you know, like, how do you have those conversations when things are just gonna, you know, get ministerial approval?
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like a return to keeping things close to the vest. And in your view, was it prompted by the NIMBYism that just, you know, the crowds came in, as Dan Dioka was talking about earlier this morning, that you know, that just characterized his entire week was getting yelled at. So do you think that was taking down the website was also just they were getting too many comments? It was too crazy, or
Just the power. I mean, there's a reason why the YIMBY movement started in San Francisco, and it's just, you know, there's 200 laws. I think somebody mentioned yesterday that. So it's just the strengthening of, you know, the state just putting their foot down and saying, you know, this is how things are going to be done. You people don't get to, you know, you don't get to like weigh in on you know, the shape of the windows or, you know, every little thing, you know, in these applications. There's a code, follow the code, and you can, you know, you have every right to build the building you want to build.
Yeah. And so it's but in the process, we lose some discussion. And yeah, I see what you're saying. Liam Dillon, you've been covering housing, doing a great job out in California, out in LA, all over. Yeah, what I mean, are you ready to, you know, go on vacation or what?
Very soon, yes. And I'm not trying to be critical, JK, just it's somewhat of a response. It's like the idea, though, that we should be thinking about what the community feels about a particular development through an 8-hour planning commission meeting that is held from 9 to 5 during the week. That's not the whole community. It's people who can show up at the planning commission or can hire someone to show up at the planning commission. And I've never been attracted to stories that are like neighbors dislike project X, Y, or Z, because it's just the same story over and over again, different city, same city, different day. And challenge that I've had is to try to think about how to think about community needs or community interests or community desires or input aside from that construct, because that construct is deeply inequitable and often deeply not reflective of what people say that they want or they need.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yes, sure. Then we'll come to you, Andres.
I don't know if this is gonna work or not.
Yeah.
Oh, it is, okay. I just wanted to ask, listening to the last few comments, whether those of you who write about housing are in touch with the associations in your areas of local community, nonprofit community development organizations. There is one in virtually every state and or major metropolitan area. So California Community Economic Development Association, ANHD in New York, you know, and you name a place and I might be able to come up with the organization, just because a lot of you have spoken to, well, what's the human side of the story, right? And it's another opportunity to get that perspective. These organizations can put you in touch with people on the ground where development is or isn't happening, and provide you with some information. So if you're not already in touch with those kinds of organizations, I encourage it.
Good, excellent. Andres?
Well, I wanted, Andres Figlucci, Miami Herald, I wanted to respond to the delegate from LA.
From weighing in from Miami?
Weighing in from Miami, I hear what you say, and you're right, but you know, we're reporters and we can sit there and see if the neighbors who are complaining have a valid complaint or not. I can just tell you from experience that I have learned so much from listening to what others have to say about these projects. I may think I know a little bit about development, but people will bring up points that I never thought of. And so that is what becomes a story to me. The unexpected insight or the real issue that's not the usual NIMBYism, because every neighborhood is different and some of these neighborhood complaints are valid and they are not gonna be held. I mean, and JK is right. In Miami, the zoning code was rewritten 10 years ago, 21, you may have heard about it. And one of the things they did is a lot more projects became administrative. And suddenly you have, projects turning up in neighborhoods that nobody knew were coming. And I think the public, the old phrase in journalism, the public does deserve to know what's coming. And we're in a position where it's hard for us to even alert. You don't know what the reaction. Some projects may actually be embraced by the community, but I think people deserve to know what's coming into their community. And I wanted to make a broader point, also following up on Ms. Bryan. I can't see her first name. I'm sorry. On the lingo, the words like density that we tend to use. I mean, I'm trained in the old school where you don't use jargon, and yet we do use some of these words. And what I found out is a word that technically to maybe people in planning are neutral words, like density, to a lot of people that's like, whoa, that's a bad word, right? And so part of our job is to explain what does density mean and what are the, theoretical or real advantages of bringing higher density to certain areas. So to me, it's using the jargon, but to really explain to people what it means, and then in these meetings to listen to these reactions, and that's the basis of stories that inform and contextualize, I guess.
You're working with alarming words: density, climate change. Yes, please. We'll go ahead and then to you, Greg.
I just want to also second that. I was planning to say a similar thing, which is I feel like I read about different policy areas, and I feel like housing is it stands in sort of its own category where I think all of us in this room no, it's a really important issue. It affects all these other things. It's it's a big part of people's life. It's one of the biggest expenses on people's bills every month. And it's like, how do you get people to care? But it's this area that has mortgage lenders and urban planners and architects and manufacturers and all these people who use all these really steep in jargon kind of language and AMI, as Felicia was saying, there's sort of a real, I think our source, I had an experience recently where I was touring a factory of what the company CEO calls volumetric modular housing, and And even earlier in the last panel, I'm just like, this is not mobile, because I would have, but like there are plenty of companies that call it relocatable, and there's like lots of synonyms, and everyone's sort of fighting over the terms. And I think it was Jim Gray who said to me earlier, there's plenty of just non-regulated manufactured housing, and it still is manufactured housing because they're manufacturing in a factory, and those are like basic words, and we don't have to like I think as journalists we need to know the HUD regulations and why certain people in certain sub-industries stick to certain definitions, but we're also speaking to the public who just speaks in regular words. And so I think I have found there's like this interesting interplay where like I'm talking to sources that are doing a certain important work 24/7, but they're also having their own semantic debates with their colleagues at their professional industries, and we're like trying to learn about those and then try to help the public understand why this all matters. And I just feel like it's going to involve sometimes us upsetting some sources who's like, no, that's not what that means. And it's like, well, you are, you're having this conversation. And there's actually like multiple conversations going on around language at the same time.
All right, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Seattle.
Thank you, Chair. Lost my voice. Too much good conversation the last few days. Wanted to make 3 relatively brief points.
Just tell everyone who you are.
Of course, Gregory Scruggs, the gentleman from the Seattle Times. Wanted to make a plug for covering housing stories in rural areas. One of the most popular stories I've done in the last year or two was on a small recreation amenity-rich mountain town. Their affordable housing challenges. Maybe a drop in the bucket if you were to look at demographics and actual scale of housing challenges, but it seems to resonate with readers, especially when we get outside of some of the urban centers. I also wanted to suggest I bring news from the future that the Yimbys have won. In our council, we had city council elections a couple weeks ago, and one of the takeaways was that the Yimby-Nimby dynamic is done. Like even the quote-unquote moderate candidates are all basically in favor of more housing. Whether or not that is a harbinger for municipal politics elsewhere might remain to be seen, but it did seem like a bit of a watershed moment, at least in our electoral and civic conversation. And lastly, speaking of electoral politics, a couple big elections coming next year, and I feel as though housing has penetrated national mainstream political conversation in a way that hasn't happened in a very long time, if not ever. I believe watching the Republican debate a week or so ago, even Vivek Ramaswamy brought up zoning reform from very much like a laissez-faire point of view. But just the fact that it's being talked about on the debate stages, I believe it was part of the 2020 Democratic debate as well. I think we'll see more of it. I think it's an opportunity for journalists to strike while the iron is hot.
So the Yimbys have won, yes.
Hey, Roshan from Vice and Next City. I just want to point out one thing that I think happens a lot is there's this conflation when people talk about Yimbys and NIMBYs, where poor people and rich people get filed under NIMBY. People who are tenants who are fighting gentrification get called NIMBYs. People who actually have backyards and are trying to keep people out of the backyards are accurately called NIMBY. People who have never had a backyard and will never have a backyard are also called NIMBY for reasons I don't understand. But I think that it's really important to make a distinction between those two categories, because what's actually happening is that the people who are actually NIMBYs, who have backyards, are saying there's no affordable housing here in the suburbs, you can't put it here. And then the land values are going up into these urban centers that are getting gentrified, and then people are rightfully angry about it. And then when we talk about community processes, I think he was correct to say that the problem is that we're the community processes themselves aren't the issue. It's that they're not designed to empower people who are at the margins of society. They're not designed to empower poor people. They're not designed to empower Black, Latino, Asian people who live in these communities and care a lot about the communities. And this is actually, if you go back decades, the community control issue is something that people have been writing about since like the 1960s. I read an essay yesterday by Frances Fox Piven that she wrote in like the 1960s about this idea that like, well, actually we need to just empower the communities who are marginalized because like they're getting rolled over in these community development meetings in cities. So I think like to me like a big thing that I'm seeing happening is a complete flattening of like everyone who has issues, regardless of the level of power they actually have, getting flattened into this category of NIMBY. And I think that it leads to like really dangerous kind of conversations.
Wow. Yeah, that's really good. David, I think yes, just tell us who you are one more time.
Sure. I'm Dave Dudley. I'm an editor with Bloomberg City Lab, and we cover cities all over the world, and cities, big ones and little ones, and it's a chaotic kind of mandate. But the sort of this isn't very deep, but it's sort of the theme that like kind of really struck me from a lot of our conversations, including this one, is sort of the power of the neighborhood itself as sort of this irreducible core of local policymaking and resilience and everything that we're all kind of interested in. And I'm struck by how we kind of, you can kind of turn the neighbor into this character, and often a villainous character, but often a life-saving character, and the degree to which having a strong neighborhood and having a neighborhood feel like their voice is being respected, and how basically the road to getting whatever you want done, policy-wise or building housing-wise, goes through the neighborhood, and how does that relationship play out in different cities around the world is really sort of been the challenge. But I have no great deep insight about it, except to redouble my efforts to understand the voice of the community, the people who are living in those backyards or yearn to have those backyards and so forth. And it just struck me that so much of our conversation was sort of around this character that who is not actually in the room today. Many of us are actual neighbors.
Yes, we should all remember that. Just like, when you're in your car, you have a certain kind of attitude, but ultimately you're going to be a pedestrian yourself, and so stop honking at them. Renee Loth, Boston Globe.
So Renee Loth, Boston Globe. This is sort of related, but it's also sort of bigger. We heard yesterday and today about from the planners about the difficulty they have with trust in the community, and that don't even talk to me about fixing my sidewalk because I know where that leads. And there's a big problem with trust in the media, and also all of us have this same challenge. I'm interested. I mean, maybe it's about knowing your community. That's really important. Maybe it's about not using jargon. I don't know. I'd like to hear more from my colleagues about what you're doing to build and maintain trust with your communities, with your readership, at a time when, all kinds of expertise have been devalued, right, in our society. So what are we doing about that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, I think, because last year's Journalist Forum was on climate, and there was a lot of consensus about things that don't deserve balance or an opposing view, and I don't know. I mean, do people think that dynamic is at work in housing when many of us, intuitively feel like people should have access to housing and shelter? But that, in turn, could affect how the media is viewed in the community as being sort of on one side or another.
Jenny Monk, Connecticut Mirror. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing at the Mirror to practice community engaged reporting. So for us, it's a fairly intentional process that we talk about before we start on a story, while we're working on the story, and then following up after. So that sometimes looks like having community events in conjunction with nonprofits to talk to people, giving people like resources, often that's translated into Spanish, things like that. And I think it's been helpful in particularly getting people to talk about poverty, which is, I think, there's some shame that people feel when we're talking about money and housing. And then the other thing is, I forgot who was talking about it before, but like sort of the bad news bias, right, that journalists have. So I think that's another piece of building up trust with communities, is not just doing stories when something's gone wrong, but when things are going right.
And covering the fights. Now, I just want to say, since we moved up everything by an hour, the remaining 10 minutes, but we're going to put up on the screen, very important, the QR code. It's also on your agendas to fill out the evaluation. Just take a picture of that thing, and as you're on your train or plane, maybe while it's fresh in your mind, because we really want to know more about what works about this. And so, but let's go for a couple more minutes. If the questions keep coming. Megan, were you going to? Oh no, okay. I thought you were calling for the microphone. You were just coughing. Covering the fights, the conflict is also a compelling story. Sometimes, like out in San Francisco and other places, or in California. I mean, that mountain lion story was really fun to read, and you sort of like think, I can't believe they're trying to, hide behind the mountain lion just so they no new housing comes into that community, and so it can often be quite colorful or entertaining in a way, but it is, at the end of the day, sort of covering the fight. Yes, please.
Sorry, I was going to just say something again, going off of what everyone has been saying about, and I think this kind of goes to the community engagement aspect, and I was talking actually about this with David yesterday, because the SF Chronicle recently decided to turn off comments on our articles. Which people have a lot of different opinions about. I mean, I've been doing my own little mini survey and and obviously the comments are usually like a pretty crappy place. Like, people are mean, Yet I do think that there is value in giving people that outlet, kind of the same way what JK was talking about, where you have a meeting, and of course, those comments are never going to be representative of every single person in the community, but I do think that our society is suffering from many people from all different walks of life who feel like they are not being heard and they're not being taken seriously. Like, people who are marginalized, people who, just everyone in the community feels like they don't have a place to go to say what they think. And I think that's especially exacerbated when they see the media as being one-sided. That can be detrimental, I think, to the civic discourse and lifeblood of a community. And so I think that it's just important to kind of think about, if we're going to change some of the processes by which we have discourse, what are the new ones that we're going to replace it with? Because I don't think it's helpful to kind of shut all of that down, and it doesn't give people an outlet. And I fear that this destruction of discourse is leading to violence and other chaos in our society in general, and it's just exacerbating people's angers and frustrations and feeling like they don't have anybody to turn to. And so, I don't know what the answer is, but I just really think that, again, for journalism in general, and also for discussing the futures of communities, we need to have some sort of forum where people can come and they can share their concerns and share the things that they like. And I just think that that's a really, really, really critical part of our community that is deteriorating in various ways. And it makes sense because, some of the comments are ridiculous. Like, we don't need to have a 10-hour meeting. I don't need to read comments saying how, bad of a journalist I am all day. But that's their right to say that. You know what I mean? I think it's important that there be some kind of platform for that to exist.
So you don't agree with this policy of turning off the comments per se?
I personally do not. And I'm an opinion columnist, so I can say that. Don't tell the Chronicle.
And of course, a lot of newspapers have done, the strict rules about the engagement, but still, it can get pretty feisty, as we saw here. George McCarthy.
Yeah, thanks. So, I just wanted to mention something because one of the things that I think we might not have gone over very well here is just how important getting the housing reporting done well is, because I've been doing deep background work for Chris Arnold for probably 15 years now, and I don't know if you've caught the work he did just recently on the VA foreclosure problem, but just yesterday the VA stopped all foreclosures on the VA mortgages as a result of that. So this stuff really matters, and to the extent that you care about housing as a human right or anything else, the opaqueness of housing markets is real, and it really takes somebody that is a good storyteller or somebody that's able to kind of demystify what's going on to understand secondary markets like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and what they mean to kind of the experience of the average person, or why we should worry about institutional investment in our single-family housing market. It does matter, and people will not take action, and many of the decisions that actually get played out on maps and lands and stuff end up being done behind veils where people will never even know who the main actors are, right? So this is really, really critical work, and it's especially important in as confusing and as opaque a sector as housing. So you should at least take pride in the fact that you're doing important work, and it can really, really matter in the lives of people. So that's just kind of my closing remark.
Oh, that's fantastic. We used to, in the Globe newsroom, we used to say, the phrase was "Globe gets action," but sometimes, that it's really true. But it takes a lot of hard work. I want to ask one, perhaps final question, although we can keep going. What is there? This is a story about people. It's about understanding the fabric of communities, but it's also about data. And everybody loved Jeff Allenby and his mapping technology work. Can anybody think of it? Is there anything you would like to know? Is there something you wish there was a study on to answer a question? This may be too difficult to, funnel down into one final moment here, but, is there research that, through the course of your work you have yearned for? And maybe, Chris Herbert, you could think about this or articulate this as well. Or David, are there underreported, under-researched areas, or some areas that need more research and literature review? Or Megan, go first. Yes, please.
Well, I know that Harvard has something coming out about this, the Joint Center, rather soon, but I'm just shocked at how little is being said about the housing crisis as it relates to older people. Our largest, people over 65 are about to be the larger group than younger than 18 for the first time ever. I was telling Rhonda about my 87-year-old father. He has Social Security and a pension, and his landlord decided to sell the house that he lives in, and we had to scramble, continue to scramble to find some place for him to live. He makes too much money to go into a nursing home and have it paid for. Why is nobody talking about this? Are we all, are we just really uncomfortable with the idea that we all are aging, and that as a society we've chosen sometime long ago that we don't care about old people? We've made those choices over and over and over again, and we're just ashamed that we've done that. That's what I want to hear about.
Aging.
Well, we're releasing a report November 30th on this.
Because actually, I'm dealing with my 91-year-old mother, and have been for 2 years.
Not a contest.
Well, let me tell you about my 92-year-old mother. No, go ahead.
But it did occur to me early on when I'm undertaking this, and I know next to nothing about it, although I should, because I'm a year from Medicare, so I shouldn't. But I wish there was a how-to guide to guide you through the maze of elder care when you're responsible. And there is, obviously there isn't. There's, part of the problem is we don't have a rational system, so how do you write a how-to guide to a totally irrational system? But some guidelines, some kind of, best practices or best things, really down to a best thing to do for your parent kind of guide as to Medicare, ALFs, what to look, just really basic stuff, what to look for, what to, what the warning sign may be, or, and just how the whole thing either works or doesn't work, and just to be warned of the pitfalls, because I have spent, you probably have 2 days and days and days just trying to solve some stuff that's just crazy and makes no sense whatsoever. So,
in full disclosure, David and Chris, we were going to have a session on aging, but it was just a matter of what we could cover. And David, you mentioned a little of this,
we were going to have it, but we forgot.
Now, what was that thing we were going to do?
And just to echo what Megan said, we are releasing a report on Housing America's Older Adults on November 30th. It's going to have a deep dive into the linkage between housing and supportive services and how hard that is, choosing between assisted living versus in-home care. So anybody wants to cover that story? I think we'll probably have a embargo press release coming out next week, so be in touch with Carrie Donahue, and we'd love to have you cover it. This is a report we're going to do every other year going forward, so we're going to keep at this.
All right, in that vein, Patrick Condon, you may end up having the last word. Could you imagine that?
Yeah, I was tempted not to say this, but I'll say it anyway. We've talked a lot about marginalized communities, and that's really good. I don't think we've talked enough about the communities who are not marginalized, which are the communities that are pushing, in my view, for sure, a kind of political strategy which is eroding journalists' capacity to deal with neighborhoods on the one hand, but it's also being driven by unmarginalized communities who have, at least in just the continental United States, $1 trillion of potential asset value gain per year based on this set of decisions. And really all of that $1 trillion is actually community produced. That's a consequence of the way we've built our cities and the value that is embedded in that for both workers and entrepreneurs. So anyway, follow the money, I guess, would be a suggestion.
So a whole constituency class that we don't often think about, out to protect their land and property value, working in various ways. You mentioned Carrie Donahue. I just want to say a quick word. Christina McGeehan, she's waving now, the communications director, and her contact information is on the QR code in the resource gallery as well. We will also follow up with more resources. And wait, before you leave, No, I know. Thank you for coming. I also just want to thank our events team at the Lincoln Institute. Caitlin McLaughlin, Kate Ostermiller, Caroline Bayer, and Laura Bernstein, who's you've really gotten in touch with. Laura Bernstein as well, who's not here. She had an illness, but did so much work coordinating everybody. So don't forget to fill out the evaluation. Christina McGeehan, am I forgetting anything? Caitlin, am I forgetting anything? All right, so that means we say, once again, thank you. These 2 days have been just really fabulous, and we appreciate this dialogue. So safe travels.